Alright everyone, it's time for a video on the myth of toxic masculinity. This goes slightly hand in hand with Twitter debating actually from the other day, talking to people that think that there's a wage gap. Let me explain that. The wage gap is the idea that if you take every man in the US and every woman in the US and you average out their incomes, that there's a discrepancy. But that's due to voluntary lifestyle choices. The insinuation of the political left, and this is where really you get the dicking around in the arguments. People on the left take that number and they insinuate, sometimes if they're smart without actually saying it, because of course they'd be wrong, they insinuate that this is due to discrimination. Well, it's not. The wage gap is due to voluntary choices, different behaviors. Women are more likely to stay at home. Within fields, they're more likely to choose the part-time position. This has been the case for a while. This is changing, by the way. Women are actually more likely now to seek a truly high education. Their income disparity, therefore, is being reduced. They're more likely to go into certain professional work fields where they make a huge amount of money. That has changed culturally and it's changed behaviorally over time. But toxic masculinity is sort of twain with this argument. The idea of toxic masculinity is that traditional masculine roles are somehow detrimental either to men or to women or to society in general. It doesn't exist, and I'll tell you why. Again, the highbrow would say, well, look, here's a rubish redneck without a piece of paper saying they have a PhD in women's studies, trying to mansplain the issue. What I am saying is that if you look at the definition of toxic masculinity and all of sort of its associated bits, its cores of material that it speaks of, you're looking at total subjectivity. You're looking at a system, an idea that is built entirely out of the subjective. There's nothing objective there. The idea is that you have some sort of utopian, idealistic society that you're working towards, and things, therefore, that are a detriment to that are detrimental in general. But that's subjective, and it has to be admitted to be subjective. If you want to be morally relativistic, progressive in the behavioral, the cultural, political sense, you have to be willing to deal with that. Insofar as it's all subjective, none of these things objectively actually matter at all. The idea that something would be harmful in a cultural context doesn't matter at that point because the culture can be changed. Indeed, this is argued by the left in many cases, and in some cases to great benefit for society. The idea, for example, long ago, the feigned objectivity of the moralistic 50s, the 60s about homosexuals. The feigned moralism was, well, it's a sin, and also biology tells us it's a mental illness. Well, of course, we've changed the way we see it culturally. We see that Satan has not come popping out of the ground, the West hasn't burned and been destroyed because gay people can marry and things of that nature. A change was made culturally. What I am saying is that it would be just as adequate to say that what you could perceive of as toxic masculinity is actually virtuous. That the idea that men should be, more masculine in the traditionalistic, arguably European aspect is a good thing. It causes men to feel pressure to work harder. It causes men to feel pressure not to run out on their spouse and do crazy things. In some ways, that masculine role can be a positive thing. Within that subjective framework, if that's what you find important. So why use the term toxic masculinity? You might as well say toxic femininity at the same time. If you were to tell women, for example, well, you putting on makeup ages you artificially, can dry out your skin, cause wrinkles. Using all that hairspray, you're inhaling those vapors, that's bad mojo, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for your hair, that's an objective truth. All of these things that you do, you insist on this diamond being put on your hand for marriage, but it was mined by child laborers 10 years old working 12-hour shifts in Angola or something. You've got all of these different things. If you were, though, to seriously attempt to promulgate the academic concept of toxic femininity, you'd be called a bigot, you'd be called a chauvinist, and probably you'd be kicked out of your college. We've got to keep that in mind as well. There is a one-sided attempt here, because the whole goal of these subjective systems, insofar as they've been engineered by the more malevolent. I'm not saying that this is the way that the average college professor thinks, because they don't. They've simply absorbed this in an academic sense, happen to agree with it, and thus promulgate it without truly thinking about centrally why they're doing so. The reason why these things are one-sided is exactly the same as why, for example, Silicon Valley's censorship is largely one-sided. Their censorship for the last few years has been primarily aimed at people on the right wing of the political spectrum. And people attendant to them, like myself, people who are more libertarian. I'm not on the right, I'm not a conservative, I'm certainly not morally conservative, and yet people like me are suppressed or outright banned. The reason, though, that you would not also want to, because think of the central reason is to make money. It's to knock us out of the way, independent content creators, to make way for TV-style, sanitized, boring, crap content. The Netflix specials and CNN and things like that. That's the whole goal. Why then wouldn't you want to aim the same amount of censorship at the left? It's because you want people to see the discrepancy and fight with each other. The idea behind people on the far, far left promoting the concept of toxic masculinity without utilizing the same general mental rigor and the same academic ethos and aiming that at femaleness or anything else attendant to it is specifically to cause strife between the genders. It's specifically to cause that because the way you win ideologically is you cause other people to fight for you, if that makes any sense. If you fight everyone at the same time and say, well, women are toxic, men are toxic, everything you do is toxic, overhaul society, you're not going to have a lot of people climbing onto your ideology. It's just not going to happen. But if you can convince people that it's a pro-women movement, a progressive movement, and that your whole goal is just to shut up those evil Neanderthal toxic men with their Napoleon complexes over there, yeah, that's a lot easier because half the population doesn't feel, at least on the surface, victimized by you. Now, of course, it's still going the way of the dinosaur. What these people didn't understand is that, of course, most women still want that general monogamous relationship. Most females are biologically geared towards trying to establish something with a dude, maybe have kids, maybe not. Of course, it's more of a hit or miss in today's society. That has its own problems, its own proclivities. And so a lot of them aren't given over towards it, and a lot of the dudes that are weakling soy boys. They're not really male in the general sense. They're not really men. Not after the behavioral fashion. Biologically, well, sometimes. Of course, that's been rendered malleable too by some of these people. They want you to think of gender expression and gender as the same thing. They're not, but for academic purposes, they pretend that they are. Again, look at what this is meant to cause. It's meant to cause friction between different groups of people. Explore and you shall see the unseen hand causing these things. There are those moneyed interests that benefit from other people fighting for them. Silicon Valley benefits when the left and the right fight each other and independent content creators attack each other over censorship when really everyone's being screwed by the same system. And if you knock enough of those people on the right out of the way, they'll start in on the left as well. You've even seen this begun to happen. I predicted that years ago. The same thing happens with regards to the gender war, the toxic masculinity, misandry sort of thing. The attacks are primarily made on maleness from the academic and political structure. The reaction is that non-official but still organized groups of males or pro-male groups attack females, femaleness. You get MGTOW and things like that. That spawning is an organic reaction, but it was a foreseen one. And so I say that it's subversive in nature, and I think it's very, very funny when people pretend to be traditionalistic, but they're like, but I hate women. I'm an MRA because of the legal system. And you tell them that you should try to reform the legal system. Their eyes glaze over because they've been brainwashed, essentially. It's very, very funny. That's about all. Peace out.